The first time I heard the word dementia attached to my name, it didn't come from a doctor. It came from the woman at the pharmacy, the one who's known me since my husband was still alive, lowering her voice like she was handing me bad weather. She slid my refill across the counter and said, "Margaret, if you need help, just say so." I stood there with my coupon envelope in one hand and my little pill organizer in the other, staring at her the way you stare at a stranger who's wearing your sister's face. I had driven myself. I had remembered my insurance card. I had even brought the receipt from last month because the co-pay had changed by $3, and I wanted to ask why. But the look in her eyes wasn't about money. It was pity, soft and sticky, like it would cling to me all the way home. On the drive back, the late afternoon sun poured through the windshield and lit up every speck of dust on the dashboard. I kept my hand steady at 10 and 2 the same way my late Harold used to tease me for. He would say, "Maggie, you drive like the highway's grading you." And I would laugh, because he made me laugh even when the bills were stacked like a second set of dishes on the counter. Harold has been gone 6 years now. Heart failure, quick at the end, slow in the months before. I still reach for my phone some evenings to tell him something small, how the neighbor's dog finally stopped barking, or how the first tomatoes turned red. And then I remember there's no one to answer. Widowhood is like living in a house where one light switch doesn't work anymore. You keep flicking it out of habit, and every time you're surprised by the dark. After Harold died, I learned my budget the way some people learn a new language. Social Security came in on the third Wednesday. The pension check, smaller than we'd hoped, came at the end of the month. I kept a notebook with neat columns: utilities, groceries, prescriptions, property tax, because if I didn't write it down, the worry would sit in my chest like an unwashed dish. I paid everything by check for a while. Then my daughter insisted I modernize, so I let her set up auto pay with my bank. She told me it was safer, easier. She said it with that bright smile she's always had, the one that makes people believe her even when she's asking for more than she's offering. My daughter's name is Elaine. She's 52. A polished woman with smooth hair and a tidy house and a way of talking that sounds like she's already decided the ending. She lives 20 minutes away, close enough to drop in when she needs something, far enough to leave before the dishes are done. She has a husband, Frank, who calls me kiddo, even though my hair is silver and my knees crack when I stand. They have 2 kids of their own, both grown, both busy, both on their phones at my table while I set out coffee like we're still a family in the old sense of the word. When Harold was alive, Elaine didn't visit much. She'd call on Sundays, ask how he was, ask if we needed anything. But after the funeral, she showed up with casseroles and sympathy and a kind of attention that felt like sunlight after a long winter. I remember thinking, in the raw early days, that maybe this was the one small mercy, losing my husband, but gaining my daughter back. It's embarrassing how hungry grief can make you, how grateful you become for a hand on your shoulder, even if the hand is only there because it wants something from you. That evening after the pharmacy, I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment with the engine off. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to mean peace, and now meant I could hear my own thoughts too clearly. The mail slot in the front door was stuffed, the way it gets when I don't check it for a day. I gathered it up: grocery flyers, a church bulletin, an envelope from the electric company that was thicker than usual. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. Inside was a notice about a rate adjustment and a new payment schedule. I read it twice, then a third time, tracing the lines with my finger, the way I did when my eyes were tired. I wasn't confused. I was angry. There's a difference, but people often pretend not to see it in older women. If you're upset, they call it anxiety. If you ask questions, they call it forgetfulness. If you insist on answers, they call it stubborn. I set the notice on the kitchen table next to my bank statements. Yes, I still printed them, because paper doesn't vanish when someone changes a password. I made myself a cup of tea, the cheap black tea Harold liked, and I sat down with my reading glasses and the small desk lamp that makes everything look like an interrogation room. My checking account had 3 withdrawals I didn't recognize. Not huge, 200 here, 150 there, just enough to slip under a person's attention if that person was tired, grieving, or trusting. The memo line on one of them said care expenses. Another said medical. I felt my face heat up, not with confusion, but with humiliation, as if someone had walked into my bedroom and rifled through my drawers. I picked up my phone and called the bank. After the recorded voice and the menu options, a young man came on the line and asked for my name and the last 4 digits of my social security number. I gave them without stumbling. He asked for the security question, and I answered it too. My first pet's name, Daisy, a little mutt I'd had when I was 9. The line went quiet while he typed. "Mrs. Carter," he said finally. "I'm seeing those transfers were authorized through online banking." "I didn't authorize them," I said. I heard my own voice, steady but thin. "Do you have anyone who helps you with your account?" he asked, carefully, the way people ask if you've spilled something on the floor. "My daughter set up autopay," I admitted. "But she doesn't. She wouldn't." He didn't say the word, but I could hear it hovering between us. Dementia, confusion, vulnerable. "I can note this as a dispute," he said, "but if the device and login credentials match, it may be considered authorized. Do you remember sharing your password?" I stared at the family photo on my refrigerator. Elaine, in a blue dress at her wedding, her arm looped through Harold's. Everyone smiling, everyone looking like they belonged to one another. "I remember a lot of things," I told him. "I remember what I had for breakfast. I remember how much my mortgage payment used to be. I remember my husband's last breath. I don't remember giving anyone permission to take money from my account." He paused, then softened his tone. "If you come into a branch, they can go over it with you in person. Sometimes it helps to bring a family member." A family member. I almost laughed. Instead, I thanked him, ended the call, and sat very still. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from Elaine. "Hi, Mom. I told Aunt Susan you've been having some memory issues, so she won't worry if you repeat yourself at Christmas. Don't be mad. It's for your dignity. Also, I need you to sign a couple documents I'm bringing by tomorrow. Just routine stuff. Love you." My tea sat untouched, cooling into something bitter. The kitchen seemed to tilt, not because I was dizzy, but because I suddenly realized the ground under me had been shifting for a while, and I had been calling it adjusting. I reread her message slowly, the way you reread a sentence when you can't believe it's on the page. She hadn't asked if I was having memory issues. She had announced it to other people like it was a fact, like it was a story she owned. I thought of the pharmacy clerk's pity, the bank representative's careful questions, the way Frank had once taken my car keys off the hook and joked, "We'll drive, Mom, safer that way." The way Elaine had started answering for me at my own doctor's appointment last month, leaning forward and saying, "She gets a little mixed up," while I sat there fully awake, fully present, watching my own life get narrated by someone else. Outside, a car door shut, tires on gravel. I looked through the window above the sink and saw Elaine's white SUV pulling into my driveway a day early, sunlight flashing off the windshield like a wink. I wiped my hands on a dish towel I hadn't needed, because sometimes your body reaches for a chore when your heart doesn't know where to put itself. Then I picked up my bank statements, stacked them neatly, and slid them into the old manila folder where I kept my house deed and Harold's life insurance paperwork. The folder felt heavier than paper should feel. When Elaine knocked, I didn't rush to open the door the way I used to. I walked there at my own pace, the floorboards creaking under my slippers, and I reminded myself of something my grandmother once told me when I was a girl. People will treat you the way you allow them to, and they will call it love if it makes them look better. I opened the door and smiled, because I am still a polite woman. Elaine smiled back, bright and easy, holding a thick envelope against her chest like it was a gift. "There she is," she said, stepping inside as if the house were already partly hers. "How are we feeling today, Mom?" Elaine laid that thick envelope on my kitchen table like it was harmless. Then she slid a pen toward me, the cheap kind with a bank logo, and my stomach tightened the way it does before a storm. "I brought everything highlighted," she said, already pulling out pages. "It's just so we can help you out, Mom. Nothing scary." Her perfume filled the room, powdery and sweet, and it made me think of department stores at Christmas, when you can't breathe but you smile anyway. Elaine had always been good at smiling through discomfort. She sat in Harold's chair without asking. Frank hadn't come, which felt intentional, like this was meant to be mother and daughter, intimate and quiet, easier to control. The papers were clipped together with one of those black binder clips. I saw headings in bold, lines for initials, a section titled Durable Power of Attorney and another titled Authorization to Release Information. At the top corner was a logo from a local law office I recognized from billboards near the highway. "I didn't ask for this," I said softly. Elaine's smile stayed in place, but her eyes sharpened. "You didn't have to. I'm being proactive. After Dad, I promised myself I wouldn't let anything slip. You've been forgetful." I reached for the first page and read it slowly, not because I couldn't understand, but because I've learned that people who want something from you always try to rush the reading. The document said she could act on my behalf in financial matters, access accounts, sign checks, sell property, make decisions in the principal's best interest. "My best interest," I repeated, tasting the words. Elaine leaned forward, voice gentler. "It's protection. It's what everyone does. Aunt Susan agreed it would be wise." So that's why she'd told Susan, not for my dignity, for backup. I turned the page. There were blanks already filled in, dates typed neatly. Her name, printed again and again like she'd been practicing ownership. I glanced at the notary block at the bottom, empty, waiting. "Where did you get my account information?" I asked. She gave a small laugh. "Mom, I set up your online banking, remember? You asked me. You were overwhelmed. You said you didn't want to deal with passwords." I remembered the afternoon clearly. Harold had been gone only a few months. My hands had been shaking when I tried to log in. Elaine had taken my phone gently, like she was taking a sharp object away from a child. "Let me handle it," she'd said. "You need to rest." It hadn't felt like theft. It had felt like relief. On the counter, my landline flashed a missed call. I didn't need to check the number to know it was probably Susan or the church ladies, someone checking in. Elaine had set the stage well. It's easier to convince people you're sick than it is to convince them you're being exploited. Sickness makes them sympathetic. Exploitation makes them uncomfortable. Elaine tapped the page with her fingernail. "Just initial here and here. Then we'll get it notarized. I scheduled an appointment at the UPS store. They have a notary." My mouth went dry. I looked at the pen. I thought of Harold's hands, big, warm, careful, signing the mortgage papers decades ago, telling me, "Read every line, Maggie, even the lines that bore you." "I'm not signing this today," I said. Elaine's smile finally slipped. "Why are you making this difficult?" "I'm not making anything," I replied. "I'm reading." She stood and began to pace, like the kitchen suddenly couldn't contain her impatience. "You don't understand how hard this is for me. I have my own family, my own bills, and now I'm trying to make sure you don't get taken advantage of." The irony landed like a stone. I kept my face calm. Old women learn to do that. If we cry, we're unstable. If we get angry, we're irrational. So we become quiet, and people mistake quiet for surrender. Elaine stopped near the fridge and pointed at the photo of her wedding. Do you know how many times I've worried about you? You forget appointments. You repeat stories. You left the stove on last month. I turned the wrong burner on, I said. Once. It's not normal, Mom. What she meant was, it's useful. I slid the papers back into a neat stack. If these are routine, then they can wait until I've had my own attorney look at them. Her face tightened. An attorney? For what? You think I'm trying to hurt you? I think I'm trying to be careful, I said. Elaine exhaled hard and picked up her phone, thumbs moving fast. Fine. I'll tell Susan you're having one of your stubborn days. It's exactly what I'm talking about. You get confused and then you dig in. I watched her type, and something inside me went cold and clear. She wasn't simply taking money. She was rewriting my identity. Once people believed I was losing my mind, any objection I made could be labeled a symptom. Any boundary could be treated like a tantrum. Elaine left the envelope on the table and grabbed her purse. I'll come back when you're calmer, she said, voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear through the open window. And please, don't drive anywhere. Frank and I agreed it's not safe. Then she was gone, her SUV backing out with a crunch of gravel, like nothing had happened. I stood in my kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant bark of a dog, and I realized my hands were steady. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. That mattered to me more than it should have, like I needed proof I still belonged to myself. I picked up the envelope and opened it again, this time with a different kind of attention. I looked at the law office name and copied it onto a sticky note. I flipped through every page and noticed small things Elaine hadn't expected me to notice. A line that referenced my house address, a paragraph about transferring real property, and a section that included a place for my initials next to waiver of independent counsel. She didn't just want to help. She wanted my signature on a permission slip for my own disappearance. I went to the hallway closet where I keep my important papers in an old fire-safe box. I pulled out my deed, my insurance policies, my will, signed years ago with Harold sitting beside me, the two of us joking about who would outlive who. I also pulled out the folder with my recent bank statements. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened my checkbook and wrote a check to myself, cash, for $20, just to see if my signature still looked like mine. It did. The ink flowed smooth. My name didn't wobble. At the bottom of the bank statement, there was a customer service number for fraud. Next to it, a note that said, "For your security, we may request photo ID in branch." Good. Paperwork, procedures, things that didn't care about Elaine's smile. I set my tea kettle on the stove and listened for the click of ignition. The blue flame caught immediately. I watched it for a few seconds longer than necessary because I wanted to remember what in control felt like. When the water began to heat, I sat down and made a list on a plain sheet of notebook paper. Not a dramatic plan, just a record, the way I've always kept records. Dates of transfers, amounts, the bank representative's name, Elaine's text message about telling Susan, the name of the law office. Outside, the sun slipped lower, turning the windows gold. I felt the loneliness, yes. I felt Harold's absence like a hollow in my ribs. But under it was something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time, a quiet certainty. Elaine had tried to make me invisible by calling it care. I was done letting anyone else hold the pen to my life. By the next morning, the story had already grown legs and walked without me. I found out at the grocery store, of all places, standing in the cereal aisle with my cart half full and my mind perfectly clear. "Margaret, sweetheart." Linda from church said, touching my arm like I might drift away if she didn't anchor me. Elaine told us you've been having some episodes. We're all praying for you. Episodes. Such a tidy word. It wraps suspicion in kindness and sends it out into the world wearing a halo. I thanked her and moved on, my heart beating a little faster, my pride smarting more than my fear. Every glance felt heavier, every smile a second longer than it used to be. I could feel myself being watched, assessed, quietly measured for usefulness. Have you ever felt something like this? Not sick, not broken, just slowly erased while you were still standing there. When I got home, my phone was blinking with missed calls. Susan, another church number, even Frank. I let them ring. I needed quiet to think, not more voices narrating me. I sat at my kitchen table and spread out my papers again. The bank statements lay flat, obedient, numbers lined up in rows like soldiers. The withdrawals didn't lie. Dates matched days Elaine had visited. One transaction lined up with the afternoon she insisted on taking me to lunch and handling things on my phone while I used the restroom. I logged into my online banking, slowly, carefully. Elaine had saved the password on my old tablet, and I'd never changed it. The dashboard loaded without protest, balance lower than it should have been, alerts turned off. A secondary email listed for notifications that wasn't mine. Her email. I didn't panic. Panic wastes energy. I took screenshots of everything. Account settings, transfer history, the notification preferences. I emailed them to myself and printed them, the printer whirring like a small witness in the corner of the room. Then I drove to the bank. Inside, the air smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and coffee. A young teller smiled and asked how she could help. I asked to speak to a manager about unauthorized transfers. My voice didn't shake. That mattered. The manager was a woman about my daughter's age, with sharp glasses and a practiced calm. I laid my papers on her desk, one by one, the way Harold used to lay out tools before fixing something. I didn't accuse, I explained. These transfers were not authorized by me, I said. I have not been declared incompetent. I have not signed a power of attorney, and I am requesting that access be reviewed immediately. She nodded and typed, asking questions, checking IDs, comparing signatures. She asked if anyone assisted me with online banking. I told the truth. She asked if I'd given permission for transfers. I said no. There was a pause, then a change in her posture. Mrs. Carter, she said, we'll need to escalate this. In the meantime, we can freeze online transfers and issue you new credentials. Please do, I replied. She slid a form across the desk. It was simple, straightforward. I read every line before signing. When I handed it back, my hand was still steady. Outside, I sat in my car and cried for exactly 1 minute. Grief has a way of sneaking in through side doors. I wasn't just mourning the money. I was mourning the daughter I thought I had, the trust I'd already buried. Back at home, I checked my voicemail. One message from Elaine, her voice tight and sharp. What did you do at the bank, Mom? They locked me out. This is exactly why I was trying to help you. Help. The word had lost all meaning. I called the law office listed on the papers she'd brought. The receptionist put me through to a junior attorney who sounded surprised when I gave my name. Yes, he said carefully. Your daughter contacted us regarding potential planning for you. Without my consent, I said. Silence, then a throat clearing. Mrs. Carter, we can't proceed without speaking directly to you. I'm sorry if that wasn't made clear. It wasn't, I replied. Please note that I do not authorize any documents prepared at her request. I'll make a record of that immediately, he said, and I could hear the typing. I hung up and felt something shift inside me. The fog Elaine had been spreading thinned when exposed to procedure and paper. Rules didn't care about family dynamics. They cared about signatures, dates, consent. That afternoon, a police officer knocked on my door. My heart jumped, then settled. I had done nothing wrong. He introduced himself politely and explained there had been a welfare concern raised. Someone had reported worries about my mental state. He asked if he could come in. I said yes. We sat at my kitchen table. I answered his questions clearly. I showed him my driver's license, my neatly kept bills, my calendar with appointments written in my own hand. He asked what day it was. I told him. He asked about the report. I told him the truth. He listened. He took notes. His expression softened, not with pity, but with recognition. "Mrs. Carter," he said finally, "I don't see any cause for concern here. If anything, it sounds like someone may be overstepping." Overstepping. Such a mild word for something that had nearly taken my life apart. After he left, I stood by the window and watched his patrol car disappear down the street. The neighborhood looked the same. The world hadn't tilted. Only my understanding had changed. Elaine had tried to turn my age into a weapon against me. She had almost succeeded. I made dinner for one that night and ate it at the table instead of the couch. I folded my napkin the way my mother taught me. Small rituals matter when you're reclaiming yourself. Did you ever realize too late that you were being used? I hadn't realized too late. Not yet. And as I washed my plate and set it in the rack, I understood something with a clarity that surprised me. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning my freedom. The next few days passed in a strange quiet, the kind that follows an argument when everyone is waiting to see who will speak first. Elaine didn't call. Frank didn't text. The church ladies stopped checking in. Silence can be peaceful, but it can also feel like you've been set aside on a shelf, labeled fragile. I used the quiet. Every morning, I woke at the same time I always had, just after 6, when the light crept in pale and honest. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my notebook, the one with the soft blue cover, and I wrote down everything I remembered from the last year. Not feelings, facts, dates Elaine visited, things she insisted on handling, bills that suddenly shifted from paper to digital, conversations where she spoke for me. Memory, I reminded myself, isn't just what stays in your head, it's what you record. I requested my credit report online. It arrived in the mail 3 days later, folded into a plain envelope. I spread it out and checked each line slowly. No new accounts, no loans. Relief settled in my chest like a held breath finally released. Whatever Elaine had planned, she hadn't gone that far yet. On Thursday, I went to see my primary care doctor. I hadn't told Elaine. The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and old magazines, and the clock ticked loudly enough to make me smile. Time was still doing what time does. When the nurse called my name, she looked at her tablet and then at me. "We have a note here about memory concerns," she said carefully. "I know," I replied. "I'd like to address that." The doctor listened as I explained everything. Not defensively, clearly. I asked for a full cognitive screening, documented, and placed in my file. She raised an eyebrow, then nodded. "That's reasonable," she said. The tests were simple, almost insulting. Words to remember, shapes to draw, questions about dates and current events. I answered them without effort. When she scored them, she smiled, professional but warm. "Your cognition is normal for your age," she said. "I'll note that explicitly." I asked for a printed copy of the assessment before I left. Paper matters. That afternoon, I stopped by the courthouse downtown. It's a squat, beige building with a flag that always looks tired. Inside, the clerk helped me file a request for copies of any documents submitted in my name. There were none. Another small mercy. At home, I changed my passwords. All of them. Bank, email, social media. I set up two-factor authentication, my phone buzzing like it was finally being included in the conversation. I removed Elaine's email from every account and turned notifications back on. Each click felt like closing a door I should have locked long ago. On Friday, Elaine finally showed up. She didn't knock this time. She let herself in, using the spare key I'd given her years ago. The sound of the door opening without my permission made my spine stiffen. "You can't just shut me out," she said, standing in the doorway like she belonged there. "The bank called me. The lawyer called me. Even a police officer showed up at my house asking questions." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stand. I stayed at the table, by my meeting table, my paperwork neatly stacked beside my coffee cup. "I'm handling my affairs," I said. "You don't need to." Elaine laughed, sharp and humorless. "You think this looks good? You freezing accounts, calling cops? Everyone thinks you're confused and lashing out." "Everyone who hears your version," I replied. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. "You're embarrassing me." There it was. Not concern, not love, reputation. "I asked for time," she continued. "I asked for trust, and you went behind my back." "I went in front of mine," I said. She reached for the papers, but I slid them out of reach. "Those are my documents." "You're making a mistake," she snapped. "If something happens to you—" "Something already did," I interrupted. "You told people I had dementia." Her face flushed. "I was protecting you. You were positioning yourself." For a moment, she looked like she might cry. Then her jaw set, and I saw the woman she'd been becoming for years, the one who measures relationships by leverage. "Fine," she said. "Do it your way, but don't expect me to clean up the mess when you can't manage." I stood then, slowly, feeling the weight in my knees and the strength in my spine. "Take your key," I said, holding it out to her. She stared at it like it was an insult. "You're cutting me out?" "I'm setting a boundary." She snatched the key and stormed out, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the windows. The house settled into silence again, but this time it felt earned. That evening, I sat on the porch and watched the sun go down. A neighbor waved. I waved back. The world hadn't decided I was invisible after all. I knew Elaine wouldn't stop. People who try to take control rarely do when challenged. But I also knew something else now. I had documentation. I had witnesses. I had my own voice back. And for the first time since Harold died, I felt like I was standing on solid ground, even if the path ahead was going to be steep. On Monday morning, I drove to an attorney's office in town, the kind tucked between a dentist and a tax preparer, with beige blinds and a brass plaque that had been polished by 1,000 anxious hands. I brought a file folder so thick it barely closed. The receptionist offered me water in a paper cup and called me dear in a way that felt respectful, not dismissive. The attorney's name was Mr. Whitman, late 60s, neatly trimmed gray hair, glasses that slid down his nose when he read. He didn't rush me. He let me talk until my voice stopped shaking, not because I was confused, but because I was hurt. I laid out the bank screenshots, the printed transfer history, Elaine's text message, the power of attorney packet she'd tried to push across my table. I showed him the police card the officer had left after the welfare check, and the printed cognitive screening from my doctor with the words "within normal limits" underlined in yellow. He nodded slowly. "You've done the right thing by documenting," he said, "and by getting that medical assessment. It shuts down a lot of narrative games." Narrative games. The phrase made me exhale, like someone had finally named the thing choking me. He asked me questions that were precise and practical. Who had access to my house? Who had access to my accounts? whether I had any existing power of attorney documents on file anywhere, whether I had a will. I did, but it was old. Harold and I had written it when Elaine's children were still in elementary school. Then we update it, Mr. Whitman said. And we do it in a way that leaves no room for someone to claim you didn't understand. He explained options without lecturing: a new will, a revocable trust if I wanted to avoid probate, a durable power of attorney that named someone I actually trusted, with limits written clearly, not the broad blank check Elaine had put in front of me. A healthcare proxy separate from financial authority. He also mentioned a simple letter, formal, dated, sent certified mail, stating that Elaine had no authority to act on my behalf and that any attempts to represent otherwise were unauthorized. You don't need revenge, he said gently. You need barriers. That word, barriers, felt like relief, not punishment, protection. When I left his office, the air outside was sharp and bright, winter sunlight cutting clean lines across the sidewalk. I sat in my car for a moment and watched people come and go, carrying their own folders, their own worries. I wasn't alone in this kind of heartbreak. That didn't fix it, but it steadied me. On the way home, I stopped at the hardware store and bought a new deadbolt. The young cashier offered to help your husband install it, and I smiled and said, I'll manage. When I got back, I hired a local handyman from a flyer pinned at the library, licensed, insured, the kind who gave me a printed invoice before he even touched his toolbox. He installed the lock in 20 minutes, tested it twice, and handed me 3 keys. Only you, he said, as if he could sense the shape of what had happened. That night, I set up a small camera by my front door. My neighbor's grandson had installed one last year after someone stole a package off her porch. The device came with a little sticker that said, recording. I pressed it onto the window where it could be seen from the walkway. I wasn't trying to trap anyone. I was trying to stop being surprised. 2 days later, a certified mail slip appeared in my mailbox. Elaine's name was on it, printed in block letters. My hands didn't tremble when I carried it inside, but my stomach sank anyway. The envelope was from the same law office she'd used, the one with the highway billboard. Inside was a letter full of soft threats, dressed as concern. It said Elaine was worried about my cognitive decline. It suggested a family meeting to discuss guardianship options. It included a list of incidents I recognized instantly, little stories exaggerated into symptoms. The wrong burner, asking the same question twice at Thanksgiving, misplacing my reading glasses. At the bottom was a request. I should come in to review documents and confirm my wishes. My wishes. Not my rights, not my autonomy. My wishes, like I was choosing between 2 dessert menus. I read it once, then again, then I placed it neatly into my folder. I didn't call Elaine. I didn't argue with the letter. I called Mr. Whitman. He listened, then said, Good. Now we respond in writing. The next day, I went back to his office and watched him type a reply on letterhead that looked clean and serious. It stated that I was competent, that I had completed a medical screening, that I had retained counsel, and that any further attempts to pursue guardianship based on misrepresentation would be met through proper legal channels. It also requested, in clear language, that Elaine cease contacting third parties to spread claims about my mental state. He mailed it certified. He handed me a copy for my records. The paper felt heavier than it was. On the drive home, my phone buzzed, a voicemail from Susan. Margaret, she said, her voice tight. Elaine says you've been scammed by someone online and you're hiding it. She says you're refusing help and it's getting dangerous. Please call me back. I sat at a red light and stared at the steering wheel, the leather worn smooth where my thumbs rested. That was the newest twist. Not just dementia now, but a scam. something that made me sound reckless, gullible, like my judgment had cracked. Elaine was building a case out of whispers. When I got home, I opened my laptop and pulled up my email. There was a message from my bank's fraud department confirming my complaint was under review. There was another confirming my new login credentials were active. I printed both and added them to the folder. Then I did something that surprised even me. I called Susan back. My sister-in-law answered on the first ring, breathless. "Oh, thank God. Margaret, are you okay?" "I'm okay," I said, and I made my voice gentle. "Because Susan wasn't my enemy. I need you to listen carefully. Elaine has been telling people I'm losing my mind because she wants legal control of my finances. I have a doctor's assessment in writing. I have an attorney. And I have records from the bank." There was a pause, thick and uncomfortable. "Elaine wouldn't. She already did," I said softly. "I'm not asking you to pick sides. I'm asking you to stop repeating things you haven't verified." Susan's breathing slowed. "Send me what you have," she said at last, quieter now. "Just send it." After we hung up, I sat in my living room and listened to the clock tick. My hands rested on my knees, warm and real. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and old books. Harold's photo sat on the side table, his smile frozen in a time when trust was simple. Elaine wanted me isolated, doubted, easy to override. But the more she pushed, the more my world tightened into something solid. Documents, procedures, witnesses, locks that clicked shut with certainty. And under all of that, something steady began to grow. Not anger that burns fast, resolve that lasts. Elaine didn't respond to the attorney's letter directly. She never did when paper spoke louder than her voice. Instead, she tried something else, something quieter and in some ways more dangerous. It started with my doctor's office calling to confirm an appointment I hadn't made. Then my insurance company left a message asking about a care coordination request. A social worker from the county aging services department emailed, politely professionally, asking if I'd like support managing daily tasks. On the surface, it all looked helpful. Underneath, it was a trail of breadcrumbs leading to the same conclusion Elaine wanted everyone to reach on their own. I didn't cancel anything, I confirmed. If people were going to look at my life, I wanted them to see it clearly. The social worker, a woman named Karen, came on a Tuesday afternoon. She arrived on time, clipboard in hand, sensible shoes on her feet. I noticed details like that now. People who follow procedures tend to respect them. She asked if she could come in. I offered her tea. She declined, but smiled. We sat at the kitchen table where so many conversations had already tried to erase me. Karen asked about my routine. I told her. When I woke up, what I cooked, how I paid my bills. She asked about transportation. I handed her my car insurance card and my maintenance receipts. Oil changes don't lie. She asked about memory. I told her about my husband's death because grief does strange things to time, and sometimes sadness gets mistaken for confusion. I showed her my calendar, my labeled folders, my medication list with dosages written in my own hand. She listened. She didn't rush. At the end, she closed her clipboard. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "I don't see a need for services at this time." Relief washed through me, slow and warm. She left me a card anyway, just in case, and I thanked her for coming. That evening, I watched the doorbell camera notification pop up on my phone. Elaine had come by while I was out walking the block. She stood there for a full minute, knocked once, then left. I replayed the clip twice. No drama, just evidence. Have you ever noticed how people change when they realize they're being recorded? Not just on cameras, but on paper, in files, in memories that won't bend anymore. 2 days later, I received the official notice. A petition had been filed requesting a preliminary hearing to determine whether a guardianship evaluation was warranted. Elaine's name was on it. So was Frank's. My hands were calm when I read it. That surprised me. Fear had already burned through me earlier in the process. What was left was something cleaner. I called Mr. Whitman. He wasn't surprised. "This is often a pressure tactic," he said. "They hope you'll panic, agree to something informal, or fail to respond. We won't." He explained what would happen next. There would be a hearing, a judge, a chance for Elaine to present her concerns, a chance for me to respond. "A judge won't care about stories," he said. "They'll care about documentation." I had plenty. In the days that followed, I prepared the way I'd prepared for everything in my life, steadily. I organized my folder into sections: medical, financial, correspondence, screenshots printed with dates and times, voicemail transcripts, the police officer's note stating there had been no welfare concerns, the social worker's card with her handwritten comment on the back: "Client independent." I practiced answering questions out loud, not because I was unsure of the answers, but because I refused to be flustered. Elaine had always relied on catching me off guard. She called once, late at night. I let it go to voicemail. "You're forcing this," she said, her voice tight. "You're making me look like the bad guy. If you'd just signed something reasonable, we could stop all this." Reasonable. That word again, stretched thin with intention. I saved the message. The night before the hearing, I laid out my clothes like I was going to church. Navy slacks, a soft gray sweater, comfortable shoes. Respectable, but still me. I set my folder by the door. I charged my phone. I slept. Not deeply, but enough. In the morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and studied my face. The lines were deeper than they used to be. My eyes looked tired, but clear. I looked like a woman who had lived a long time and learned some things the hard way. At the courthouse, the hallway smelled like old paper and floor wax. Elaine sat on a bench with Frank, both of them whispering, both of them looking very concerned. She saw me and stood, as if she were about to help me walk. I didn't take her arm. We went into the room together. The judge was a woman, maybe in her 40s, with a voice that carried authority without sharpness. She explained the purpose of the hearing and asked Elaine to speak. Elaine did what Elaine always did. She sounded loving, worried. She talked about missed burners, repeated stories, her fear of me being taken advantage of. She said she just wanted to keep me safe. When it was my turn, I stood. My knees ached, but my voice did not shake. I spoke slowly. I spoke clearly. I referenced documents. I handed copies to the clerk. I described what had happened without insults, without emotion that could be mistaken for instability. Just facts. The judge asked questions. I answered them. She asked Elaine for specifics. Elaine hesitated. At one point, the judge looked directly at me and asked, "Mrs. Carter, do you understand why we're here today?" "Yes," I said. "Because my daughter wants control, and I want independence." The room went quiet. The judge nodded once and said she would take the matter under advisement. We were dismissed. Outside, Elaine didn't speak to me. Frank avoided my eyes. I walked to my car alone, the folder lighter now, like it had done its job. I didn't know the outcome yet, but I knew something else with absolute certainty. No one was going to tell my story for me ever again. The judge's decision didn't come right away. It never does when the truth is inconvenient for someone. Weeks passed, measured by mail and routine, by the soft clink of keys in the new deadbolt and the small comfort of knowing exactly who could enter my home. Elaine went quiet again. No calls, no texts. Silence, this time, felt strategic. I filled my days with things that reminded me I still belonged to myself, I joined the morning walking group at the community center. 3 women and 1 man, all of us moving at different speeds, all of us laughing when the man insisted on timing us like it was a race. I baked bread on Sundays and brought half to my neighbor, who repaid me with stories and the occasional ride to the farmer's market. I also kept records, old habits, strengthened. Every letter that came in went into the folder. Every voicemail was saved. I checked my bank balance each morning with my coffee, not because I was afraid anymore, but because awareness had become a form of care. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the court. I didn't open it right away. I made tea first. I sat at the table. I steadied my breathing. The decision was brief. No guardianship, no further evaluation required. The judge cited lack of evidence and noted my demonstrated independence. There was a line that caught in my chest. The respondent appears fully capable of managing her personal and financial affairs. Respondent, fully capable. Words can be a kind of medicine. I called Mr. Whitman and thanked him. He congratulated me, then said something that surprised me. "This doesn't end everything," he warned, "but it changes the balance." He was right, Elaine called that evening. Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "So, I guess you won," she said. "This wasn't a contest," I replied. She sighed. "I was just trying to help." "You tried to decide for me," I said. "That's different." There was a pause, heavy with all the things she didn't want to say out loud. Finally, she asked, "So what happens now?" I looked around my living room, the lamp Harold had bought on a whim, the rug worn thin in places where life had happened, my paperwork neatly filed, my door securely locked. "Now," I said, "I live my life, and you respect that." She didn't argue. She didn't apologize either. She simply said, "Okay," like someone acknowledging a rule they don't like but can't break. After the call, I sat in the quiet and felt something loosen in me. Not joy, not yet, but space. Space where fear had lived. The next week, I updated my will. I made small, deliberate choices. Not punishments, boundaries. I named a professional trustee for certain matters, someone neutral, accountable. I left Elaine what felt fair, not what felt like a bribe for good behavior. I told Susan what had happened. She cried, then admitted she'd had doubts all along. Doubt is a seed. It just needs time. At the community center, Karen, the social worker, spotted me and waved. "Still doing well?" she asked. "Better," I said, and meant it. Some nights, the grief still comes. Harold's absence is a quiet ache that never fully leaves, but it no longer makes me desperate for connection at any cost. I've learned something in these months, something I wish I'd learned sooner. Love that requires you to disappear isn't love. It's control wearing a familiar face. And as I lock my door each night, keys solid in my hand, I know this chapter of my life isn't about what was taken. It's about what I kept. Life didn't suddenly turn bright and easy after the judge's decision. It turned quieter. And in that quiet, I began to hear myself again. Elaine didn't disappear, but she changed. She sent a birthday card instead of calling. She liked a photo I posted on social media instead of commenting. Distance, I learned, can be polite. It can even look like peace if you don't stare at it too long. I let myself grieve that version of motherhood I'd carried for years, the idea that if I just loved her enough, sacrificed enough, she would soften. That belief had cost me more than money. It had cost me trust in my own instincts. Letting it go felt like setting down a heavy bag I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of me. I focused on practical things. I met with a financial advisor recommended by my bank, a woman a few years younger than me who spoke plainly and printed everything we discussed. We reviewed my accounts, my income, my expenses. She showed me projections, explained risks, answered my questions without talking over me. "You're in good shape," she said, tapping the page. "You just needed someone on your side." On my side. The phrase stayed with me. I consolidated accounts, closed anything unnecessary, moved savings into a structure that required in-person verification for major changes. I updated beneficiaries. I requested paper statements again. Digital is convenient, but paper leaves a trail you can hold. At home, I reorganized my office nook. Old receipts went into labeled folders. Important documents went into a new fire-safe box, heavier than the last, bolted discreetly into the floor of the closet by the handyman who didn't ask questions. When he handed me the invoice, I paid by check and filed the receipt. Control, I was learning, isn't loud, it's methodical. One afternoon, Frank came by alone. I saw him on the door camera first, standing awkwardly on the porch, hands in his pockets. I considered not answering. Then I remembered that closure doesn't always come from silence. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "Elaine wanted me to check on you," he said, eyes flicking to the camera sticker. "Make sure you're okay." "I am," I replied. He shifted his weight. "She's been under a lot of stress." "So have I said. He nodded, like he hadn't expected that answer, but couldn't argue with it. "She really thought she was doing the right thing." "She thought she knew better than me," I corrected. "There's a difference." Frank sighed. "I guess I never thought about it that way." "That's the problem," I said gently. "No one did." He left a moment later, looking smaller than when he arrived. I watched him go and felt no triumph, just confirmation. Later that week, I attended a workshop at the community center about estate planning for seniors. The room was full. Women with notebooks, men with careful questions. People who had lived long enough to know that preparation is not pessimism. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't share everything. I didn't need to. I simply said, "If someone tells you they're helping, but they won't put it in writing, ask why." A few heads nodded. A few eyes widened. That was enough. Have you ever noticed how strength returns in small, ordinary moments? Not in grand speeches, but in choosing your own groceries, in balancing your checkbook, in waking up without dread. One evening, I found an old voicemail on my phone from Harold. I don't remember saving it, but there it was. His voice, warm and teasing, telling me he'd be late because traffic was terrible and asking if I wanted Chinese or spaghetti. I listened to it twice, then sat quietly until the ache softened. Harold had trusted me, completely. He never questioned my judgment, never spoke over me, never assumed age would dull me. Remembering that helped me forgive myself for forgetting who I was. The holidays came and went. I spent Thanksgiving with Susan and her daughter. We cooked too much, laughed too loud, and nobody watched me like I might break. At Christmas, Elaine sent a gift card and a short note. "Hope you're well." No apology, no accusation either. That was fine. In January, I received a letter from the bank. The disputed transfers had been resolved, the funds were returned. The letter was formal, careful, full of phrases like "after review" and "out of an abundance of caution." Elaine's name was never mentioned. I folded the letter and placed it in my folder, then poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. Snow fell quietly, covering the street in a clean, temporary peace. I thought about how close I'd come to losing everything, not just money or control, but the right to be believed. All it had taken was a few well-placed words, spoken by someone people trusted more than they trusted me. That's what frightened me most, even now, but fear no longer ran the house. I had learned how to speak in the language that systems understand: documents, dates, procedures, calm repetition of the truth. I had learned that being gentle does not mean being defenseless. As I turned off the lights that night and locked the door, I felt something settle into place. Not vengeance, not victory, ownership of my name, of my story, of the years I still had ahead of me. By spring, my life had found a new rhythm. Not exciting, not dramatic, just mine. Mornings began with light through the curtains and the sound of birds that didn't care about court filings or family roles. I volunteered twice a week at the library, shelving books and helping people find large print editions. Funny how often strangers trusted me with their questions. Elaine and I existed in a careful truce. We spoke rarely. When we did, it was polite, factual, brief. She no longer told people I was confused. That story had stopped working. I suspected she told herself a different one now, something that let her sleep at night. I no longer needed to know what it was. One afternoon, as I walked home from the library, I passed a woman sitting on a bench crying quietly into her purse. I asked if she was all right. She told me her son was handling things for her, and she didn't feel like herself anymore. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I told her gently to keep copies of everything and to talk to someone outside her family. She squeezed my hand and said, "You seem so sure." I smiled. I wasn't always. That night, alone in my living room, I realized something important. What Elaine had tried to take wasn't just money or authority. It was my credibility. Once that's gone, everything else follows. And getting it back doesn't require shouting or punishment. It requires clarity and patience and refusing to disappear. Have you ever wondered how many people lose themselves quietly, not because they're weak, but because they're kind? My days are full now in small, steady ways. Coffee with neighbors, long walks, quiet evenings where I read and remember and plan only as far as I want to. My paperwork is in order. My door is locked. My phone rings less, but when it does, it's someone who wants to hear my voice, not speak over it. I don't think of what happened as revenge. I think of it as reclamation. I didn't destroy my daughter. I didn't humiliate her. I simply refused to sign my name away. And that, I've learned, is sometimes the bravest thing an older woman can do. If this story stayed with you, thank you for listening to mine. If it meant something to you, consider liking and subscribing. It helps these voices keep being heard. And tell me truly, if you were in my place, what would you have done?